This podcast was brought to you by Meros cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilizes the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to State of the Project Meros August 2020 edition. Now, just in case you haven't heard this podcast before, this is a podcast in which we follow all of the development process behind the project Meros. Meros is a cutting-edge cryptocurrency that combines a DAG and a blockchain. I am joined by the lead developer, a young man who goes by the name of Kayaba, and he's been joining me for the past year and a half now, and we're going to discuss in detail the most recent testnet and what Meros hopes to achieve moving forward. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce the star guest himself, Kayaba. Kayaba, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to talk about how our testnet went and what's coming up in the very soon future.
Well, we were speaking a little bit off air today, and you were saying that you were possibly spending more time with me than my wife was, my long-suffering wife. The reason why we've been spending so much time together is because we recently put out a stream. Now, this was the first time we had done a stream. And the stream was a live stream of the actual testnet in action as you kicked it off with all of the volunteers who also kicked off their own nodes. Now, let's start with that testnet. The video is not up yet because we're waiting on somebody to finish editing it. I'm not going to point the fingers or name any names, but just think of somebody whose name starts with a K and rhymes with Mayaba. But once that person has finished editing the video, hopefully we can get that out there and the people can actually see the Meros network in action, albeit without its actual interface. So you won't see the actual Meros that you'll see at the end, but you'll get to see some of the functions. Anyway, how did you find the testnet? Was it all it had cracked up to be? And basically, what were your feelings on the testnet after it was completed?
It was both satisfying and disappointing in its own way, to be honest. With this most recent testnet, developer testnet 5, I was really hoping to have something stable on the scale of days. I feel like I put in a lot of time. I feel like there have been some crashes, and I feel like debugging those crashes has been very important to the Meros process, of course. I really do my best to be responsible and make sure I'm shipping a quality product. If I didn't care about quality, just technically good enough, to be honest, Meros probably could have been out a month ago if I had that attitude throughout the entire development of Meros. But it also would have had all those crashes, and it wouldn't have the features it needed to survive. There's a reason I put in all this time and effort. And I'm disappointed that Meros still wasn't at the point I was hoping for. I was hoping to run the testnet for days, and after a few hours, it was just required too much human intervention to sustain, as in it did last for a few hours, and I'm happy with how long it lasted, but there were still some kinks that had to be worked out, which is why we're moving on to developer testnet 5.1, which I believe we'll talk about later. But at the same time, I found it very satisfying due to how it failed. So in the past, there have been a lot of obscure errors and crashes that shouldn't be crashes and so on and so on. And they were all kind of, I wouldn't say disappointing, I would say annoying. It was all these missed errors that I felt like shouldn't exist, yet they did exist, and I had to debug them, and I had to fix them. Thankfully, with this new testnet, the issues were a bit more nuanced. And there was one or two explicit crashes. I'm not going to say otherwise. But I really appreciated that the debugs weren't on the oversight level, because a lot of these previous crashes, they were annoying because despite taking a while to debug, they were relatively simple. And while these were also relatively simple in their own right, they had a lot of nuance to them. It isn't just, this should have been a better handled exception, or oh, when handling a socket, this step also has to be done. It was representative of the complex behavior meant to keep the node running for a long time. So to see those nuances break down instead of just basic coding, which is part of the process, don't get me wrong, but that was satisfying, despite my disappointment that the testnet didn't last for longer.
Yeah, so I guess there's two ways to look at it. From your point of view, you're more of a perfectionist. I'm probably the type of guy that would have put the Meros testnet out halfway through 2019 and just ignored people's complaints when they came back and said it was not working properly and things were going wrong. So from my point of view, I really enjoyed the testnet personally, and I was quite proud on your behalf that it made it as long as it did make it. And it did seem like we were kind of getting to the stage where we were going to stop the stream and leave the network running. It seemed like we had tested send-in transactions, people were receiving them. There were a few small issues with not everybody being notified of the transaction, something along those lines. I know technically I've probably said that completely wrong and you'll pull me up on it off air. But one of the main issues were that nodes started crashing. Now, what you done after that was you immediately got to work on new milestones for 5.1, which I feel should have been called 5S because it's planned to be the next stable one. But we can argue about that later. And one of those was issues that you did pull up on these new milestones. I will attach the milestones in the description. It was issue number 228, which was about nodes crashing. Now, obviously, this is quite a critical bug. Nodes will crash, having already created the block's data. Now, could you explain, from your point of view, was this the most severe issue that had cropped up, or was it one of a few? If so, what were the other few? And what steps did you have to take to rectify those issues? Just to let everybody know, at this point of recording, those issues have all now been rectified and we are kind of ready to start testnet 5.1. But yeah, Kayaba, go ahead.
To go back in time a bit, developer testnet 4S, this S standard for stable. Now, as I was commenting with the issues with the previous testnets, they weren't really nuanced. Like, sure, some of them were actually interesting behavior, and I actually had some fun tracking them down. But some of them were just basic crashes. And those crashes really just made the node unstable. And at one point, I had to completely rewrite our networking code. Don't get me wrong, a lot of it was good, but the underlying networking library we used, it was part of the standard library of NIM, the programming language Meros is coded in. And it has its shortcomings, and I had to move it to a better networking library developed by Status, the Ethereum group. They've actually done a lot of work with NIM, and I'm actually very happy with the quality of their work. So they all required effort. I'm not trying to say, oh, I forgot this one parenthesis here, I'm so stupid. No, I'm not trying to say that at all, of course. But that's why DT4S was called DT4S for stable, because the focus was on the crashes. But not only is that not expandable, like I couldn't do DT4S new or DT4SN. I can't just keep on appending letters. So the reason we moved over to the proper numbering scheme is, one, now we can get 5.2, 5.3 if we want to continue this testnet, but also because the focus is no longer on stability per se. So yes, the primary reason the nodes were crashing is because they claimed they had already created a block's data. So we have data transactions, which let you store data on the Meros network. And every single block creates one of these transactions. It does it locally. There's no need to sync it across the network. Just every participant on the network automatically learns of it when they get the next block. And the reason for this is that so every merit holder on the network, everyone who verifies a transaction, always has something to verify. Because if they don't have anything to verify, then they'll get marked inactive and there will be their problems. So this should honestly never be an edge case, because even if people weren't sending transactions, there's always going to be the claims of the block rewards. You know, when you mine Meros, or you mine the blockchain to earn merit and then verify transactions to earn merit, you're always going to get a claim for that block, for the reward for your verifications. And then that claim gets verified and starts the cycle. But it's just a nice safety. And Meros says if you add a block but can't create the data, that should be impossible. If you're only just now adding the block, You should only just now be creating the data. So we have this impossible edge case here. And when we have these impossible edge cases, we have the node panic. We have it immediately shut down, and we say, this is a critical bug. This behavior should never happen and represents something faulty with the code. And honestly, we have a lot of these panics in the code base, not because the node should panic often, but because there's a lot of impossible things the node can technically possibly do, but should never do. And by having all these panics, if this ever happens, the node will immediately quit and tell us what the problem was. So in this case, when we reorganized the chain, when we reverted the chain to an earlier point, which is need to done. So if we have two competing chains going around, say we have blocks A, B, C, and then A, D, E. So if you have A, B, and you learn of E, or the other chain, which is longer, you're going to want to revert to A and then sync up the alternate chain. It's the chain with the most work, the longest chain. It's Nakamoto consensus, which goes all the way back to Bitcoin. That said, we had this bug where, so this is actually kind of a perfect storm of bugs. Due to a different bug, these valid blocks were marked as invalid. And we have fixed that bug as well. But because these blocks, which were valid, were marked as invalid, the chain was reverted, but it didn't sync up to the longer chain. So because it didn't sync up to the longer chain and thought it was invalid, it then tried to sync back up its original chain, and it tried to rebuild it because it had just reverted. It had just said, yep, nope, this isn't the chain. But now it's going back and saying, oh, wait, that was the chain. And when it did that, it added the block again and created the data again. So when we reverted the chain, there was an oversight where we didn't revert the accompanying transaction. And that caused the panic. And that was probably that may have been the only reason that nodes crashed under this chain. So there are some other bugs, like the fact that valid blocks were marked as invalid, and those had their own fun things happen. And a lot of these bugs were interconnected. Perfect storm, which I really found interesting. So the reason blocks were failing to verify occasionally is because Meros claimed that the blocks contained existing data. So if a block says, here's a transaction, here's the actions about it, and then a new block comes along and has that same data, we reject the block. We say, you shouldn't copy this data. It's already on the chain. But when Meros has a revert to an older chain state, and then it tried to sync up the new chain state and it panicked, it left the database in a halfway point. It was both reverted, but also trying to catch up and therefore not reverted. So it kind of had this half and half limbo state. So then when it rebooted and it tried again to sync what it thought was the longer chain, it then thought the chain was invalid. So we actually wouldn't have found this bug unless we had these other bugs. And I actually kind of find that humorous, but we have actually worked on making sure the database never enters the limbo state. This has been thoroughly tested. We have made sure that when we revert the chain, we do remove its data, so on and so on.
All of these things happened in real time. So you were seeing them for the first time as I was seeing them for the first time, and you were understanding them probably a little bit better than I was. How did you find live streaming the testnet launch? Because this is the first time you've done it in this way. And would you do it again?
So I really appreciated being able to connect with the people doing the testnet with us, with our very helpful volunteers who I appreciate. I did like being able to connect with them in a more personal way. That said, I don't feel just streaming the Meros node itself when it's just a lot of text being printed out about the actions. And while that can be exciting, don't get me wrong, I don't feel that was overtly beneficial. And I had to have Discord open while I did it. And because of that, it kind of said my friends list. And honestly, that's not really a big deal. I'm pretty public about my friends. My friends understand that, they're on my servers and therefore they're going to be known. And I'm not trying to say otherwise. That said, I want to respect their privacy as much as possible. I don't want to be that asshole who goes around talking about cryptocurrency and privacy and then is just an asshole to the people close to me, And even if it's just their existence, I still want to do my best. So I honestly am just not happy with the privacy of Lost by streaming. And of course, I haven't really lost any privacy. That's the reason the video has yet to go up yet, is just because I'm editing it out and there's no copies of it going around right now. So I'm not really too concerned about the privacy aspect in retrospect, but it's not something I'd want to stream for again, combined with the fact that the video wasn't that exciting in the first place. That said, I definitely want to get on calls for these next testnets. I think it would be a lot of fun to just start a call in Discord, get in there, let other people join if they want to talk, and do the talking, respond in real time. Because I feel like that was the great thing about it. People actually heard us talking, they heard us reacting, and I don't feel we need a stream to do that.
Okay, fair enough. From my point of view, I know I'm the interviewer, not the interviewee. I really enjoyed the stream. I really enjoyed watching it happen. From a non-developer point of view, it was really interesting. As it is to hear you speak about it, it's also interesting to watch it happen and to watch some of the people's reactions when their nodes did go down and when they got them back up and those sorts of things. Although it was just text-based, to see it coming through on the network and see the network syncing up, I found it quite thrilling. So even looking back on it, it's probably something I would watch now. And I would probably, I would definitely suggest anybody who is interested in how cryptocurrencies are actually put together, especially ones that are built literally from the ground up like Meros, I would really suggest that it's something that you should watch because I think it's absolutely fascinating. And hopefully I can talk you around to doing another stream for another testnet or something else along those lines. But before I take up too much of your time, let me push on. And
I just want to say real quick, I always appreciate your feedback, and that's definitely something you'll keep in mind as we launch our next testnets.
Oh, thank you. Group hug. Right, so the next question I wanted to ask you was one that, as I was researching today, popped up, and I thought I was the hottest journalist in the world because I'd got it 2 hours after it got onto GitHub. And then by the time we spoke about just off air, no, I think we'd spoken a few hours before, you'd said you'd already fixed it. So it's no longer an outstanding issue. But for milestone 5.1, there was an issue number 235, which said that Meros will never try to unlock its merit. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Meros will never try to unlock its merit. What was that issue about, and how do you intend to solve it?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
So with Developer Testnet 5, the biggest feature we were testing was something called locked merit. When a merit holder goes offline, their merit goes offline with them. That's just a fact of life. They can't verify things if they're not online to verify things with. Or not online to see the transactions and actually verify them. So locked merit says if a verifier goes offline, it's been about an hour, they haven't really done anything, let's mark them explicitly as offline. And this removes their merit from consideration. So when they do rejoin, they don't start skewing the transaction verifications and risk some confusion about which transactions are correct or verified and which ones aren't. And there's a process to rejoin, and it's very orderly and designed with security in mind and being able to keep the network running even if a decent amount of verifiers go offline. Because when you're a verifier, it's not just you mine one block and you get verification privileges for 10 minutes. No, you actually get verification privileges for a whole year. And of course, it's at scale, and you actually have to mine multiple blocks to get a significant amount. And those people will then have an investment that they'll want to maintain by keeping their node online for said year. And it is a very carefully designed system. So with locked merit, the way you rejoin the network is you start verifying things again. It's that simple. You say, hey, here I am, I'm verifying things again. And after about an hour, you are back on the network. You're considered online and you're actively verifying stuff, and you'll get paid for verifying stuff again. That said, we have a check. When a node wants to go verify something, it only actually creates the verification if you have merit. So that means if you don't have merit, you're not going to spend your time making verifications, which offers no benefit to the network. That said, the way we implemented locked merit is we took the merit balances, what we call the state, and it has a list of every merit holder or every verifier and how much merit they have. And if you try to get the merit of a merit holder who has their merit locked, it returns 0. It basically says, without explicitly telling whatever is asking for the amount of merit, because this merit holder is locked, they effectively have 0 merit. So because of that, the verify check we had, I forgot to update it accordingly. And instead of saying this person has some merit, whether locked or not, and therefore should start verifying again, because it needs to start verifying transactions again so the verifier becomes unlocked and starts contributing again, it said right now I have effectively 0 merit because it's locked and therefore I shouldn't bother. So it was just this bug I noticed when I was doing some internal testing leading up to the testnet. I always like to spawn a few nodes up on my end, link them together, check for any obvious things. And it was actually one I noticed when I was doing some longer testing. And previously, we actually had all the issues on Developer Testnet 5.1 closed off. But we're actually planning to launch Developer Testnet 5.1 the day after recording this, August 1st. So it was something that had to be fixed in time. So even though the testnet, all the issues on it were complete, the milestone itself was still open. I didn't close out the milestone yet. So I created this new issue. I added it to the milestone, and I made sure to fix it as fast as possible. So you noted it when it went up, and just a couple hours later, I had it fixed.
Yeah. Good job on that. I thought I'd gotten a jump on you, but obviously I hadn't. I'm going to ask you a question now, and I'm going to push you for a one-word answer. Okay, so you can only answer yes or no.
Technically, there's other single words.
Okay, yeah. And technically, you can answer with one of those other single words if you feel the need to. Okay, so I won't limit you to just yes or no. I won't limit your freedom of speech because I know that's important to you, Eagle Squirrel. And the question is, would you say that the Testnet 5.0 was successful?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. In light of the success of Testnet 5.0, when mainnet?
This is a question that's always asked, and it's as much as I appreciate your desire to update our valued listeners, it does become a bit tiring because the answer is always when it's ready. And of course, I can get a bit more detailed. I'm not just going to say when it's ready. Screw off, you journalist. So now that we have locked merit implemented and we're doing testnets on it, which I'm very happy with, the question is what feature we're going to implement next. And personally, the next feature I would like to implement is something called Maroscript. So with Bitcoin, every transaction has a program attached. It's not as complicated as Ethereum, of course. You can't build CryptoKitties on Bitcoin itself. I mean, you kind of can with a lot of work and doing work on top of the Bitcoin network, like Lightning. That's on top of the Bitcoin network and enables instant transactions over Bitcoin. So don't get me wrong, the programs in the Bitcoin blockchain still have enough power to do a lot of fun things. That said, every single transaction on Bitcoin uses the script. And that really slows it down. There's just no reason for transactions to always be using such a script. So with Meros, we got rid of the script for the basic transactions. That said, when we got rid of the scripts, we also lost all the fun things you can do with them, such as atomic swaps. So because of that, we designed a second type of transaction that uses something called Maroscript. So even though most transactions don't run a script at all because they're slow, we do have a transaction that you can attach a tiny program to with limited functionality. And these programs that you can attach, they enable things like atomic swaps and so on. That's the main feature. And they're really what I want to do next. I've considered putting it off until after mainnet, trying to get mainnet out as soon as possible. But I want our mainnet release to be able to survive. I want it so if I was to theoretically drop dead the next day, the code base would be enough to continue. And I plan on updating it. Don't get me wrong. I think hard forks and network upgrades are a great thing to have. but I still want the initial network to be competent. And one of the things that requires to be competent is atomic swaps for decentralized exchanges and interacting with other chains. So I think it's going to be a fun feature to add that's going to be very interesting to a lot of people. And then besides that, the other major feature I want to call out is our funding system. But after that, I think we'll have every hard to implement feature done. There's still a couple other things, don't get me wrong, but those are the two time-taking features that I want to call out. So once we have that done, then we're just in the final testing stages.
Okay, so what were you thinking, the budget feature to go with mainnet or after mainnet?
I think it is required to have at launch in order to guarantee the success of the network. Without it, I think we would have to centralize funding for the first 6 months, and that's truly not something I'm willing to do. But if I'm not willing to centralize funding, I'd have to remove funding for the first 6 months. That's
How do you test the system that takes so much time? So, for example, I'm thinking with the budget system as you've described it in Meros Improvement Proposal 1, it will take a while for that funding to trickle through and be useful and be utilized. How do you test something like that? Because I'm assuming you're not going to run a testnet for the 6 months to a year that you would run the actual budget system for. So what would the plan be for testing?
Right. So the Meros node, it actually supports a few different networks. We have the theoretical mainnet, which of course doesn't exist yet. We have the testnet, which is what we've been using for testing. And when mainnet launches, it's going to be a place to test it's mainly going to be the same as the mainnet. Yet when we're preparing for a new network upgrade, the testnet will get it first to ensure its safety. But then we also have a third network profile called the devnet. The devnet is interesting. It's much faster when it comes to the block time and difficulty and so on. But it also has the interesting property of having its time start at 0. So time in computers is generally relative to 1970 for reasons that I won't get into here. And when we start a Meros network, we set the time to the current time, So you can't just say, oh, here are blocks from 10 years ago. They're valid. No, we set the time to the current time. That said, the developer network, the devnet, is interesting because it has the time set to 0, which means you can claim any blocks happened for the last 50 years. And because of this, you don't actually have to mine blocks. Technically, yes, you still have to hash them, and technically you're still mining them. But because we say that they've existed over 50 years, we can create blocks without having to worry about the extensive process of mining, because mining is limited when it comes to speed by the difficulty. And when you fake the timestamps and say it's happened over decades instead of over hours or days, you can make the difficulty as low as you want and therefore make it as easy to mine a block as you want. So because of that, we're actually able to generate what Meros thinks is 6 months worth of blocks within minutes on our end.
Okay. So let me translate that for the lesser-minded people like myself. What you're going to do is turn the difficulty down to 0 and press fast forward, effectively.
Yep.
Okay. And that was okay. All right. That's a really interesting, actually. I'm aware that we're already running over, but there was one other optimization which you've put in the issues part of the GitHub, which I wanted to speak to you about. I'm not sure if it's a big deal or not, but because it says optimization, it's got my spidey senses tingling, so I had to ask you about it. Meros requests block bodies for blocks without any transaction elements. It's issue number 229. I promised myself that if we had time, I would ask you about it, and we don't really have time, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What is this about, and how much of a big deal is it for the end user?
So when you receive a block, Meros separates it into two parts as to do most cryptocurrencies. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say we're special or ingenious here. So there's the first part called the block header. The block header says here is the info about the block. Here's enough to verify that if someone says, here's the contents of the block, that they're actually the contents. Here is the short summary. But the nice thing about this short summary is it also includes the mining info. So you can quickly verify it actually had all the mining power invested, and it has the proof of work required to be a valid block. So along that same path, because it has a short summary of every block, one of the things you can do is just by the header see if it had any transactions in it or not. In the case it doesn't have any transactions, Meros still requests the list of transactions for it. It's really not that big of a deal. There's not really going to be any blocks without any transactions. That said, it's something we can do to make the node a bit faster, and it also kind of just simplifies network activity. Because now if you look actually at the requests that Meros is sending out, when there's a block with no transactions, it isn't sending out a pointless request for said transactions. It's just moving right on. So it is technically an optimization, but the main focus is just simplifying debugging Meros and looking over it and making sure we have the right things going on. And it's not something that's going to affect the end user in any way, and it's probably not even something we're going to get done before mainnet because it doesn't have any impact on the protocol or functionality. It's just a nice thing to simplify the life of the developers.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for explaining that to me, and for as usual, month in and month out, putting up with my some would say alternative styles of hosting, and coming on this show to bring some more transparency to Meros, which is what I really appreciate. I know I say it every month, but I really do. So thank you so much for giving up your time. Before we do sign off, is there anything else you would like to say about the testnet or about Meros moving forward? Is there anything that I've missed out?
Just that I'm very excited for the one that's going to be the day after we record this. It's going to have all the bug fixes, and I'm hoping for it to go multiple days. So cheers to that.
Yes. So the plan is, I guess, to start I guess it's tomorrow at midday, but it won't be tomorrow when people hear this, to start it on Saturday, the 1st of August at midday GMT. No, midday. Is it midday my time or midday?
It's noon GMT. It's 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. And then if you're in China, I believe Eastern China, specifically the capital, but I honestly don't remember, it is going to be 7 p.m. if I recall correctly. I really wanted to make sure to get both all the European, the Asian, and the North American audiences. And That means I am waking up very early tomorrow.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. But the main thing is that it's at midday GMT, which is the only time that really counts. So thank you so much once again for attending these monthly podcasts. For people who have listened in, congratulations, you've made it to the end. Please like and subscribe and all that other good stuff. Also, keep your eyes peeled, because I'm hoping I can strong arm Kayaba into getting the video editing done so that we can release that video from the first testnet, because I'm quite sure it is very, very interesting, especially to non-developers, to see what actually goes into a cryptocurrency being built from the ground up. I think people will find it very interesting. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Hopefully we'll have that out before this goes out, but I don't know. I don't want to put too much pressure on Kayaba because he's launching a testnet tomorrow. And thank you very much for listening. Kayaba, once again, thank you so much. And hopefully I'll catch up with you again for the September podcast, in which we will recap what's happened in 5.1, which is also being named 5S by a small string of rebels from the east of London who are unnamed at this time. Thanks very much to everyone for listening. Kayaba, thank you again once more.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And I'll catch you next month.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex And for more information, go to www.pivex.org.